apologies for that, and to everyone. And welcome, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. We're 10 minutes in, and so I'm going to go ahead and just go quickly through this text script, just letting everyone know that you are indeed joined on the Developmentally and Trauma-Informed Police Officer webinar presented by our colleagues with IACP. Thank you all for joining and bearing with the technical difficulties that we had here. Note that this webinar is indeed being recorded right now. And if individuals are looking to download and get access to handouts, we'll have those reloaded back into the handouts pocket. Right now, no, it's blank, but with our glitch, they disappeared. But by the end of today's webinar, you all will be able to get access to those handouts. If you want to communicate with us, everyone, you could please utilize the chat window there, and it will allow for us to easily go in and to speak and communicate with everyone. For those of you all who are joined in a group, you all can indicate that you're joining with others by indicating the number of additional people in the room with you today. So please just type in the total number of other people besides yourself that are in the room with you today. Note that you will get a certificate at the end of today's webinar. And also note that we will ask for you all to take about 5 minutes to complete an evaluation. That was really quickly, and I apologize because I did want to make sure that we have enough time where we can salvage this. But right now, I am going to turn it over to Tiffany Garner with IACP. Again, thank you all for bearing with us with our technical difficulties. Tiffany, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, William. And good afternoon to everyone. Thank you again for bearing with us during a little technical difficulty as well, just as William had mentioned. I'm going to do a brief introduction of who I am, and then also I will turn it over to our presenters so they will not, so we'll just kind of keep the information flowing to you all that I know you all have been waiting for. So just to let you all know, I am one of the project coordinators here at the IACP. I work on Children Exposed to Violence grant as well as another grant entitled Community-Based Crime Reduction. And so I've been here at the IACP almost 3 years, but I wanted to just let you all know about our presenters who will be sharing some great information with you all today. We first have Lieutenant Turquati, or Lieutenant Stephen Turquati. He is the shift commander for the evening tour of the New Haven Police Department and serves as one of the 4 designated snipers on the SWAT team. Lieutenant Turquati has been a member of the New Haven Police Department for over 17 years. Prior to achieving the rank of lieutenant, he served as a sergeant and a district commander for the Dwight Chapel District and detective in the Major Crimes Unit and Tactical Narcotics Unit. As an officer, he was assigned to foot patrol in the Dwight Chapel District. Lieutenant Turquati is a recent graduate of the Police Executive Research Forum's Senior Management Institute for Police. He was awarded a master's degree in criminal justice management from the University of New Haven and a bachelor's degree in political science with a minor in history and diversity studies from Quinnipiac. I can never say that university. Sorry, it's a university. We're gonna keep going with that. All right. So our next presenter we have today is Dr. Megan Gofflin. She's a clinical psychologist and associate research scientist in Childhood Violent Trauma Center at the Yale Child Studies Center. She has expertise in responding to children, families, schools, and communities after potentially traumatic events, including direct work with the survivors following the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. Dr. Gofflin is invested in increasing access to trauma-informed care for traditionally underserved populations via collaborations with police officers, child protection workers, attorneys, and school professionals. She regularly provides trainings regarding children and trauma for a variety of community stakeholders to increase identification and support of traumatized children and their families. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter, Lieutenant Stephen Turquati, to get started with the presentation.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are located internationally. I saw one person from India out there, so it's not too early. We're going to be going over the developmentally and trauma-informed police officer for everyone. So let me just read over to the vision. You can also go along with the PowerPoint that you see on your screens. But the vision, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention envisions a nation where our children are free from crime and violence. If they come into contact with the justice system, the contact should be both just and beneficial to them. Our mission, to provide national leadership, coordination, and resources to prevent and respond to juvenile delinquency and victimization, OJJDP supports the efforts of states, tribes, and communities to develop and implement effective and equitable juvenile justice systems that enhance public safety, ensure youth are held appropriately accountable to both crime victims and communities, and empower youth to live productive and law-abiding lives. So during today's presentation, we'll cover quite a bit of material, and some of the goals for today's webinar are to first discuss the reasons why it makes sense to even think about taking a developmental approach to our police work. Second, to provide an overview of the stages of child development. Third, talk through and describe some common responses to exposure to violence that you, as officers, may observe when interacting with children at various stages of development. And finally, we want to think through specific actions officers can take to support traumatized children on scene, considering the developmental stage of children. So why should we, as police officers, supervisors, and police leaders, consider a development and trauma-informed approach when thinking about police work? So as Tiffany introduced me, she mentioned that I'm an active member of the SWAT team, and I'm sure a lot of us out there are understand the importance of training and preparation. And for the SWAT team and in my role, I want to be highly trained and extremely prepared for any operation so we can have a safe outcome. So in that aspect, same goes for our program here for use. We want to be highly trained and extremely prepared so we can assist them and give them a better opportunity to move forward after seeing a very traumatizing event. I see a direct comparison here. I think the most compelling rationale that I can offer for becoming developmentally and trauma-informed is that by doing so, officers can be better prepared to do their jobs. After you learn about the major challenges that children face during different phases of development, you will be better equipped to identify when children have been impacted by violence, and then to take actions which can be helpful for supporting children in their recovery. Police officers do not need to become experts on child development. Instead, police officers can reorient already finely honed skills of observation and problem solving and put them to work to assist children following exposure to violent or potentially traumatic events.
So I'm just going to tell us a little bit about how the information has been structured for us today. So as you can see, we're going to be covering information about 5 stages of development. So those are infants, toddlers, preschoolers, school-age children, and adolescents. And so for each stage, I'm going to briefly discuss kind of common characteristics of that phase of development and common challenges. And then we're going to talk about what trauma reactions might look like along the way for kids of those different ages. And then Steve and I are going to talk about some of the specific actions that police officers can do on scene that can really be supportive of kids at these different developmental stages as we are helping them to recover from the violence they have witnessed.
Calls for service, likely 2 conditions. As responding officers or supervisors, we know that when a call for service comes in, we can be pretty sure about 2 things. First, the kids we encounter on scene are likely to be in visible distress. Sometimes kids do not appear to be in distress, but their level of vulnerability is still high, which is something we will discuss. And second, the police activity that may be required, including securing the scene, subduing any perpetrators, making arrests, may mean that it is difficult to pay attention to the needs of the child in the moment.
Okay, so now we're going to begin. I'm going to talk a little bit about our youngest children. So when we think about babies and infants, really we're thinking that they are almost exclusively relying on their caregivers to meet their emotional and their physical needs. And, if over time a baby has a reasonably responsive and sensitive caregiver that meets their needs in timely ways, over time that really sets the stage for the baby to develop the idea that the world is a safe place where their needs are met in the context of important relationships. And that means that they develop this sense that, hey, I'm an okay person, I have agency. So we're going to show a brief video that illustrates how sensitivity and responsivity in caregiving actually helps to shape infant development.
The key to forming strong brain architecture is what's known as serve and return interaction with adults. In this developmental game, new neural connections form in the brain as young children instinctively serve through babbling, facial expressions, and gestures. And adults return the serve, responding in a very directed, meaningful way. It starts very early in life, when a baby coos and the adult interacts and directs the baby's attention to a face or hand. This interaction forms the foundation of brain architecture upon which all future development will be built. It helps create neural connections between all the different areas of the brain, building the emotional and cognitive skills children need in life. For example, here's how it works for literacy and language skills. When the baby sees an object, the adult says its name. This makes connections in the baby's brain between particular sounds and their corresponding objects. Later, adults show young children that those objects and sounds can also be represented by marks on a page. With continued support from adults, children then learn how to decipher writing and eventually to write themselves. Each stage builds on what came before. Ensuring that children have adult caregivers who consistently engage in serve and return interaction, beginning in infancy, builds a foundation in the brain for all the learning, behavior, and health that follow.
So next we're going to show Lieutenant Tarquati's favorite video, which actually illustrates how profoundly infants can be impacted when they don't have this type of responsive caregiving environment.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no
view the videos.
So it's kind of difficult to watch, isn't it? So one of the meta points that we'd like you to take away from today is the idea that we often hear, especially when we were first beginning the work with our police colleagues here in New Haven, we would hear, that could a baby really be impacted by an upsetting or traumatic experience? And we still sometimes hear it from our child protection colleagues and even other mental health colleagues who are less steeped in the work. So one of the meta points is that children of all ages can absolutely be impacted by upsetting experiences in their environment. And so I think we saw some examples of, even if a baby can't tell us with words, they can often show us about their distress. So one sign that an infant or a baby might be struggling with exposure to violence as an officer arrives on scene is that the baby can't be consoled and is just crying quite a lot. You could also see in this video the baby's body language was, the baby was showing with kind of muscle tension and kind of arching the baby's back, that it was really in distress. And, babies who are really struggling may also really, if the caregiver tries to put the baby down, the baby may just not tolerate it and kind of scream and protest to be picked back up. And baby could be crying. Now, this is going to be a kind of a common theme throughout all of the different stages of development, but what we don't want people to misunderstand is a different kind of presentation, which is if a baby or really a child of any age, as you arrive on scene where something terrible has just happened, it's actually very worrisome if that baby or that child is kind of calm and just seeming unfazed. That's actually a really abnormal and concerning presentation. So although we hear that kind of a lot, oh, the baby slept through it, what we want you to take away is that actually that may be cause for concern. So now we're going to move on and talk a little bit about older kids. So now toddlers, and by that we're thinking about from about 1 to 3 years old. And so although toddlers are certainly relying still very much on their caregivers to meet their needs, they have more tools on board to really navigate their world. So one development that occurs at this age is gross motor development, so the capacity to move. So most babies, although there's a wide range of normal, kids are starting to crawl by around 7-8 months. Most kids are starting to walk by about 1 year to 1.5 years. And then in addition, another really important developmental achievement at this age is that toddlers are developing language. So most kids are usually saying, a few single words by about 1 year old, and then by about 2 years old, they're putting simple sentences together like more milk or up please. And it's also important developmental achievement at this age that a toddler has developed a relationship with a few key people in their life that they feel really attached to. So they may be attached to mom, to dad, and to a daycare provider. And they are really starting to discriminate between those people who they, if everything is going well, they trust to meet their needs, but they're discriminating between those people and strangers. They also may be at this age, because they have, compared to babies, the toddler understands that, hey, I'm different than my mother. Along with that comes the idea that being away from my caregiver actually could be quite scary for me. And so it's a normative thing. It's not necessarily a sign that something is wrong for toddlers to have some anxieties about when it's time to separate from their caregivers. And then I think most people on this call would probably be really familiar with the idea of terrible twos, which really is a term that we use to think about how toddlers are working really hard to exert their independence from their caregivers, and they do that in ways that can be kind of hard and challenging to manage. I'm not going to have the dinosaur PJs, it's got to be the trains. And anyone who's spent any time with toddlers knows how concerned and preoccupied they can be with boo-boos, right? So their physical body is their self, and so concerns about their safety and their body integrity are primary at this age. And finally, an important developmental achievement for most kids in this developmental stage is toilet training. And when a child has successfully achieved that, then it kind of contributes to this sense of mastery over their own bodies, which can feel really good and helpful to these kiddos. Now, so what do toddlers look like when they're struggling with trauma reactions after exposure to violence? So, we were just talking about kids between 1 and 3, but when you arrive on scene and if a kid is really struggling with what they have heard or directly witnessed, that you may be dealing with a kid who seems and acts much younger. They're kind of talking or crying or seeming more like a baby. They may be really, really protesting for their parents to pay attention to them. Oh, the whining. I have a 4-year-old. This is not my favorite. But so this may be, the toddler's best attempt to try to, let a parent know, I really need you, Mom. And they may be showing regressive behaviors, including having accidents. And, we already talked about that toddlers, it's a somewhat challenging developmental phase for the toddler and for their caregiver, even when everything is going well. But when these kids at this age are struggling with trauma reactions, some of those normative challenges like the temper tantrums can just, the volume can get turned up on those, or that normative separation anxiety that I talked about can just become much more pronounced. So, for example, a toddler who couldn't tolerate, their caregiver even leaving the room to use the bathroom. And then finally, we certainly could see toddlers who are kind of withdrawn, not wanting to spend time with family, kind of being off to themselves and seeming really quiet. And similar to what we talked about with the babies, we get very concerned if we arrive on scene and we see a toddler who is essentially acting unfazed, acting as if they are not impacted. That's quite concerning. And then, remember when I told you that by the end of this developmental phase, toddlers have really developed this sense of attachment with particular people. So it's actually a sign of concern if a 2- or 3-year-old is running up to an officer and being overly friendly and acting overly, not at all anxious. That would be an odd presentation that might make us wonder, is that kid, is the kid not getting their needs met in the context of those primary caregiving relationships? And so they're kind of looking for, are you going to meet my needs? Can you meet my needs? And so they're kind of indiscriminate. And then finally, toddlers, as we described, they have this new developmental achievement of some words. And so what you may also see and hear at this age is kids who are kind of just repetitively talking about what they heard or what they saw. So moving on to preschoolers. So by that, we're thinking about kiddos from 3 to 5. So the developmental kind of complexity is increasing. These children are really having, they are really increasing their complexity of their cognitions. They're using play to sort through what's on their mind. So if you spend time with preschoolers, you'll see them, for example, playing with their dolls, and mommy is going to work, and the preschooler says, I'm sad, but I know mommy will come back. So this is how they're working through some of the normative challenges of being a preschooler. And they have a lot more complexity to their language skills. So what we talked about in toddlers, it's really kind of short and simple sentences that they're able to communicate with by the end of that phase, but preschoolers can really let us know more about what's in their minds, which can be very helpful. So what does it look like when preschoolers are struggling with trauma reactions following exposure to violence? So we see the repeated themes that these kids may really be uncomfortable and protest being away from their caregivers. They may show increased and heightened worries about their bodies. They may lose some of the skills that they had achieved. So kids who hadn't had accidents, for a year or two, all of a sudden might be starting to have toileting accidents. A very common trauma reaction in this age is also sleep disruption, kids who don't want to sleep alone, or kids who are having a lot of nightmares. And then those tantrums that are more associated with the toddler phase actually can reemerge for kids, preschoolers who are struggling, and it can be really quite challenging for the kids and for the parents. We can see a lot of fear and phobias. So for example, if a child's traumatic experience happened on a playground, they may not want to go outside, they may not want to go back to a playground, and they may let their parents know that. A preschooler may become much more withdrawn from their family, kind of want to stay in their room more. And we may start to see the kind of difficulty concentrating and trouble listening to adult directions that actually can be misunderstood, for example, as other things like ADHD, but really it's about, I can't concentrate because I can't stop thinking about that scary thing that happened. And then in an effort to regain a sense of control after such a scary and out of control experience, sometimes preschoolers will start to kind of be pretty terrible and pretty provocative with the adults around them. And of course, this may be their best attempt to regain control, but the risk is that they may be pushing away the people who are there to support them.
So what can officers do for young children? Ensure that the infant, toddler, preschooler is in the least chaotic part of the environment. It's no different than separating some of your witnesses or victims. You want to put them in a least chaotic environment so you can get the best possible information from them. The same issue for children. You want to put them in the least chaotic part of the environment, which will be better for them and how we can set them up with their next step in meeting and calming down their fears at the time. Whenever possible, do not separate the child from the caregiver on scene. Obviously, the caregiver may have to go to the hospital, so you may want to find a different caregiver, but do your best not to separate the child from the caregiver on scene. When necessary, just such as, if the primary caregiver needs medical attention or maybe being arrested, find the alternate caregiver that's known to the child, someone that they're very comfortable with. Support the caregiver to get calm, to maintain their own calm. They're also involved in this very high-strung situation that's going on right now. So you want to have that caregiver to try to maintain their bearing as well, so you can help that child maintain their bearing. So I hate to use the word bearing, but as everybody uses it, maintains their bearing, it starts to be a better supportive situation for everyone. For kids age 2 to 5, engage the child's brain with an activity such as drawing. We've had officers try to help the child play with a coloring book or an Etch-a-Sketch, and keeps them occupied. Be at eye level, explain in simple language why the police are there, and ask what questions the child has. So we've had officers do many different things. Some officers will go over by the dollhouse and play with the child. Some officers will, like I mentioned before, grab those crayons and work on a coloring book. The officers will maybe throw a football with them, kick a little ball with them, anything that's going to engage that child's brain for those moments to kind of release that or relieve that chaotic experience for them, just for the momentarily while we're getting order and that child's moving along. Obviously, this, within regards to having a safe scene, you're not going to start throwing a football or coloring if the scene's not safe yet. That goes without saying.
And I just want to add that from my observations, I've been worked over the past 10 years with officers at New Haven Police Department, that this getting down to eye level, it's something pretty extraordinary to watch. This figure of authority that has just secured the scene, then, crouching down and making eye contact with the kid is very meaningful to the child and helps make that authority actually not a scary figure, but a helpful figure that's accessible to him. And the officers in New Haven do it like it's, they don't even think about it. But I think, it's something not to be taken for granted. It's really pretty impressive.
This is the benefit of having our collaboration for over 20 years and being part of our curriculum in the academy and our in-service training. It's just officers know how to do it. It's ingrained in them. It's no different than pulling out the handcuffs when need be, or, doing a proper felony stop. It's just part of our training, and the officers are so ingrained to do it thanks to our collaboration.
And they do it very well. So a couple more developmental stages to get through. So for school-age kids, so we're thinking about 6 to 12-year-olds now. So here, we're thinking about if everything is going well at home and development is kind of moving forward as it should, at this age, kids they have energy to be able to invest in things outside the home. And so really what that means is they're investing in academics, they're investing in friendships, and they're investing in, extracurriculars, either art or sports or music or something like that. And if they're kind of doing reasonably well across those different domains of functioning, they have this sense that, hey, they're building a positive sense of self-esteem. Okay, and so some of those aggressive impulses that are a normal part of all of our development, whether we like to remember that or not, actually can get channeled into being really competitive in pro-social ways, like with being really good at academics or competitive sports. And as I mentioned, kids at this age, their world is starting to become bigger. It's not just about, the parents, the siblings, and maybe the daycare provider. Now it's about outside the home friendships and teammates, etc. So what does it look like when a kid at this age range is struggling with reactions to struggling with the reactions to exposure to violence? Well, they could look depressed and withdrawn. They might look really anxious. They may be fidgety, can't kind of sit still. It's clear they're very nervous, won't make eye contact. On the other hand, it could be a kid who really can't stop talking and seems like they're bouncing all over the place. They may be clinging to their caregivers, which typically by this age, as I just mentioned, kids are moving away increasingly from their caregivers, so that's really a sign that this kid is struggling. This is the age range where we start to see, and I'm sure officers have really seen this a lot, but this idea of the kind of tough guy or tough girl kind of presentation of, hey, no big deal, this is just what happens in my house, or this is just what happens in my neighborhood. And we don't want to be fooled by that. We actually think that, yes, that's an adaptation, but it may, there's a cost going on inside. Kids at this age may seem really excited about what they saw. They may be asking lots of questions about, the bullet or the gun, or details about the violence that seem odd to you. And we understand that as really, this is part of their attempt to really process and digest something so scary. They certainly could be tearful on scene.
So it's going to be a poll question here.
So we want to hear now from you. So either what have you already done or what do you think you would do?
So for those of you working in law enforcement, what specific actions have you taken when responding to, on scene for a school-age child and who has experienced trauma?
These are great already, great answers.
Thank you. Great job.
So a lot of people are talking about, talk to them directly, ask questions.
Animal.
Oh, someone has a great idea of, a stuffed animal. Getting down on their eye level. A lot of people are talking about making sure, like Lieutenant Tarquati talked about before, that they are not in the most chaotic part of the scene.
So don't make any false promises. I like that.
Really good. It's very tempting to do that when we want to immediately comfort. So show interest in them.
Ask about the pets.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So I've seen officers really do a great job of using their toolbar, their tool belt, their car. I know my son, who's 7, would love to see the lights, hear the siren, if it's appropriate. Someone is mentioning make sure offer to call a friend or a relative, which is great because it's about kind of if the primary caregiver isn't immediately available, either because of medical or arrest or some other reason, making sure the kid is with someone that they know. Oh, that's brilliant. So people are also adding to explain what's happening, and we would absolutely support that idea. Using child-friendly language. Don't get into too much detail, but yes, to be honest.
I saw regulate breathing up there. There's actually exercise that the doctor and I do, and explains, the breathing techniques that children can use to help calm them down a little bit.
Right, because the material that we're talking with you all today about is part of a full day training that we offer.
A lot of great responses there. Everybody clearly knows, what they're doing on scene and how to get these children to be a little less stressed out in these chaotic environments.
Yeah, that was really great. So I think some of the things that we're going to talk about have already been covered, but we can briefly go over them.
Attempt to limit the exposure to out-of-control behavior by parents and others. Find out what questions the child has. Talk to the child about what happened in direct and plain language. Child distress, help them feel in control again. These breathing techniques help these children feel in control again.
And if you don't know those breathing techniques, or if you don't feel comfortable, coloring and playing ball, those activities kind of work in similar ways. And those are things that we all know how to do.
Emphasize the current plan to keep them safe. Support the caregiver in meeting the child's needs when possible. Again, the caregiver may be receiving medical attention or maybe the primary caregiver may be getting medical attention or maybe getting arrested. So whoever that follow-up caregiver is, that supporting caregiver, make sure we're going to help them meet the child's needs. There's the alternate caregiver. Re-engage thinking part of the brain through fine motor activity. Like we mentioned, drawing, throwing the football, kicking a ball, playing with dolls, getting to do something with their hands and their brain that will help them re-engage the thinking part.
Great. So we're going to move on to our final developmental stage, which is puberty and adolescence. So as we all remember, or maybe we prefer not to remember, that during this developmental phase, there are profound physical changes that have an impact on our psychological development. And one of the most important things that we're trying to accomplish during this phase is to kind of think about who we are, what's our identity. And as part of that, we want to become and kind of complete this process of separating from our caregivers. So we want to become more independent. We want to be different from our parents. But that's also a scary and complex process. And so what often happens in adolescence is that there's a lot of fighting and battling about rules and limits, like, what time's my curfew? Are you sure I can't go to that party? Are you sure I can't wear that? And so on. It's also very normal at this age for adolescents to be really preoccupied by how they look and how they kind of come across to others. Do they stack up? And peer pressure, this construct that we all have heard about, is really prominent in this phase, and it's really important for most adolescents to feel as if they belong. And as much as adolescence can be a time that is pretty challenging because of some of the tasks that we're all working on at this age, it also brings additional tools like abstract thinking that younger children just don't have the capacity for yet. So that said, what can it look like when you arrive on scene and there are adolescents struggling with what they've seen or heard? One of the tough ones can be this rage that is often directed, or I'd say misdirected, toward the police in terms of, as an authority figure.
I think we've all seen scenes where the adolescent has started showing that rage by, maybe punching at a wall, kicking at stuff, screaming, especially in, here in New Haven, you'll see some very violent incidences, and then the child will be just directing their anger towards whatever they can direct it towards. Most times it's a wall, and unfortunately sometimes it's the police officers.
Mm-hmm. And by this age, unfortunately, some of the children that are teenagers have seen a lot of different incidents of violence. So we can also see teenagers crying. Again, that bravado, like, no big deal, I didn't see anything, I don't know, I don't care. And I guess I would just encourage you, just don't take that at face value, that there's something happening on the inside, even if they're not showing it on the outside. These adolescents may seem really anxious, or alternatively seem really interested and excited by the violence. They may have a real hard time communicating with you. Just making coherent sentences may be hard for them. And as we've talked about before, they may be kind of getting stuck on certain details or moments of what happened and kind of talking about it in a repetitive way.
So what can police officers do for adolescents? acknowledge that the event that brought police is, it happened. There's something brought the police there. We have to, explain to the adolescents what that event was and why we're there. Share information about normal symptoms that people have after exposure to violence. This will make, it almost that sense of bravado and that, they want to be adults in some instances, and, tell them it's normal to be frustrated. Tell them it's normal to be angry about things that happen and the violence that they may have been exposed to. Offer adolescents the opportunity to ask questions about what's next. What's next for mom? What's next for dad? Whether it be medical attention, an arrest, they may ask questions about the justice system. Are they going to go to court? Can they afford an attorney? Things that, we may take for granted that some of these adolescents really want to know. They care about their caregivers, and they want to know what's going to happen to them or their brother and sister. When appropriate, ask adolescents about current concerns they may have about safety. It's not normal for a home to be struck with gunfire. Regardless of what, some may think, that false sense of bravado that we discussed earlier, that, oh, this is my neighborhood, it's still not normal to have gunfire go into your home. And those are concerns that, we can try to help provide about safety. Typically we'll, the doctor and the other caregivers with the Yale Child Study Center will use the district commanders and within the 10 districts of New Haven to kind of help set up different safety plans at a later date. May not happen that same night, but they will come back the following night to help with some of these concerns regarding safety. Recognize developmental context for standoffishness or hostile attitude. Just, have when your officers kind of know, that those earlier slides, what adolescents are going through mentally. And we teach this class to our academy recruits and the in-service training. You kind of learn what's going on in an adolescent's brain and why they're going to be standoffish. It's really not just the police. They're standoffish to teachers. They're standoffish to coaches sometimes, standoffish to their parents at times. So understand, through this recognition, why they're standoffish and hostile.
Right, not take it personally. So we're able to stick around for a few more minutes given the technical difficulties that we unfortunately experienced at the beginning to have some question and answers for our folks.
Yes. All right, thank you, Lieutenant Tripathi and Dr. Goslin. We appreciate you all so much for your presentation. And you are indeed correct. We will open it up now for people to ask questions. And we will try to get to as many as we can in the next 9 minutes. But even if we can't get to your question, we still want you to ask that and put the question down, because what we're doing is developing a list of questions and responses from our presenters that we will post to our webpage. So you guys will have available to download and to have access to those at a later time. So I will now go over a few of the questions that I have now received, and just also let you all know the responses that were received earlier in the poll question, we will provide those as well. That was the first question we received. They will be sent out to each of you all, because I understand that was important what was shared, and maybe that will help you all in your work, in the work that you're doing. So we'll have those available. All right, so first question we have, or the other question we have is, could you share some good books, articles, or white papers on this subject? So this is for you, Lieutenant Tripathi and Dr. Goslin, if you have some suggestions about books, articles, or white papers.
Sure, and maybe that could be something that we can make available.
Okay. Yeah, that may be a good idea. As we prepare to post a lot of our information to our website, we can post that information as well for our participants from today. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And the Department of Justice website has a lot of excellent resources about trauma reactions in kids of different ages based on nationally representative studies. So that is, also a really great resource. But we'd be happy to provide perhaps a short list of additional readings.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Goslin. All right, so we have, let's see, a few questions here that I see. Seems a topic about autism here. So I'm going to start with the first one about training for kids with developmental disabilities, which will include, you guys can speak to the autism. I think we have someone later on who shared a little bit about kids with autism show inappropriate social behavior and how do you deal with developmental disabilities in those situations. So if you guys can speak to that, that would be great for our participants.
Sure. So I think it's a great question, and this is kind of cutting edge stuff in terms of trauma-informed and developmentally informed policing, is how to take those principles that we kind of very briefly talked about today and think about children with, non-neurotypical kids. I guess one answer that comes to mind for me is that a strong commitment to community policing would really go a long way, because if you know the children in your community, you're going to come to learn about, for example, their autism diagnosis and how that presents in terms of the way they talk, the way that they react in stressful situations, and then you're going to not misunderstand it when you see it in a on scene. And so to me, one answer is really, to the extent that we can, really getting to know all the people in the community, but especially, these kids with special needs. That's where my mind goes first. I don't know if you would add.
So, I mean, I was very fortunate to be on a walking beat, so I was able to get to know the community very well. What you really want to have is your officers be, once they're able to control the scene and they kind of release their command presence a little bit and be a little bit more personable, that would be the opportunity they could use to kind of speak to if the person's being arrested or if the person's being medically treated, what does your child with autism and developmental disabilities, what helps them? What can we do to help this child right now? Other people within the community, they're going to know the child. You can use the interaction with neighbors. Hey, listen, we really are having a problem right now with this child with developmental disabilities. We really don't know what this kid, what helps this child. Do you know anything that helps this child? So have your officers kind of ask around and find different techniques that will help this child, because what works for one child with developmental disabilities may not work for the other child. So you really want to find what works specifically for that child with the disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Hope that hopefully answers a little bit of it.
And another part B to that, Lieutenant Turquati, is there any special training that officers can receive that will help them respond maybe more appropriately to children experiencing developmental disabilities?
So periodically, the post, everybody has their post websites for police officers and standards training councils. If you go on your post sites, Connecticut, periodical will have it maybe once or twice a year where they'll put a post training out, usually an 8-hour class for dealing with children with developmental disabilities. The classes are usually rather small, so you want to get your officers in quick enough. And if you can get an officer or two in once a year and they can bring back that training for your agency, that's perfect.
Mm-hmm. All right, great. All right, here's another question for you all. What are your recommendations for those situations you encounter when the response isn't what you expect developmentally? Those times when the child falls into the worrisome behavior category. So any thoughts on that question?
I think it's important to be truthful. I think both of us would agree that you really don't want to tell the child that everything's going to be all right, because in a lot of incidents it's not going to be all right, and it's going to take a little time for that child to heal. So you want to be as truthful as you can be without projecting so much fear into that child that they can't grasp it or can't handle it. It's a fine line. Some officers are very good, some supervisors are very good, some clinicians are very good about giving just enough of the truth of what's going to happen next.
Okay, great. All right, I'm sorry, Dr. Goslin, go ahead.
Just that it looks like that if that person who asked that question was asking about clarified the question that wondering about what to do when the baby or the child is presenting in these unusual ways. And I think, I mean, the reason why we do this work is that you can't do anything unless you've first identified, right? So you can't help a traumatized child unless you are curious about, has there been an impact for this child? And so the first step is already what everyone here is already doing, which is becoming really curious, or continuing on that journey that you've already been on. So the first answer is to be able to notice that. And so, you could be making comments to the caregiver about, I'm noticing that your baby is kind of sleeping through this, and kind of providing psychoeducation to the caregiver about what they might be looking for in the days and weeks to come, and how that makes you feel concerned. I don't think we can underestimate the potential impact of an officer talking with a parent about potential trauma reactions in a child. I think that's quite powerful. So I guess the short answer for me is to notice. And
when these officers identify it, they're able to, here in New Haven, they're able to notify to the Yale Child Study Center, and they have a weekly meeting where the certain cases come up, and if an officer notices that lethargic toddler, this officer documents it, notifies the counselors, notifies the clinicians, and the clinicians are able to do a follow-up at a later date, and then they'll discuss this in our weekly meetings.
Right, because sometimes the baby who is asleep in the chaos is then the following week, just won't sleep and, eating all the time or not eating. And so sometimes the symptom presentation may shift.
All right. Thank you so much, Lieutenant Derquati and Dr. Goslin, for your responses. And we would like to encourage all of you all to continue to post questions in our audience question box, because we're going to have our presenters respond to those, and we will send those out to you all so that you can have that information to take back with you to inform your work. So I'm going to stop here, and thank you all again for coming today. I'm going to turn it over to William from our NTTAC team to wrap it up for today, but please be on the lookout for links in your, emails from us with links from today's videos. I know that some of you all were unable to hear that, so we want to make sure you have that available, as well as the responses from today. So those will be coming, and then we will let you know when the webinar will post to our website so that you all can take a look at that as well. So William, I'm going to turn it over to you right now.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Tiffany. Thank you to IACP, and thank you very much to our presenters for a great discussion on a great topic. Everyone, I'm just going to wrap up with a few brief announcements for today's webinar. Please be mindful that you can contact NTTAC through the website displayed on this slide. You can stay up to date on the latest information by signing up for NTTAC's TTA listserv. And also, don't forget to check us out on Facebook at OJJDP TTA. You may also contact OJJDP via the Help Desk by following the contact information on this slide. Do you have a training or technical assistance need? If so, you may do so by visiting OJJDP's TTA 360 platform to submit a request for help. And the website is on this slide here. As a reminder, the recording will be posted on OJJDP's NTTAC YouTube channel. And then you can also contact OJJDP TTA Help Desk for the transcript and all of the other supporting videos, including the videos that were also mentioned during today's presentation as well. If everyone could please take a few seconds just to review this disclaimer. And lastly, we would appreciate it if you all could take about 5 minutes to complete the feedback survey. Again, thank you all for joining us today. Apologies for the technical difficulties, but no worries. We will have all of the resources that you need following this webinar. Everyone, thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful afternoon. Take care. Goodbye.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone.